72 hours. That's all it took. 72 hours for Ruth Collins to erase 15 years of existence. And when Yoon Jin Ho finally realized what had happened, his entire empire felt like it was crumbling beneath his feet. He stood in the doorway of his penthouse, blood still fresh on his cufflinks from the night's business, staring at empty rooms that somehow still smelled like her lavender shampoo. The security footage showed her tucking Jaden into bed just 8 hours ago. But when his guards kicked down the bedroom door, they found nothing but stripped mattresses and a single photograph left face down on the nightstand. Jin Ho picked it up with shaking hands. It was from Jaden's 5th birthday, the one he'd missed. In the photo, his son was crying into a melted ice cream cake, while Ruth sat beside him in the dark, her eyes hollow and distant. On the back, written in her precise handwriting, "You chose your throne. We chose our freedom." The strange thing was, Jin Ho didn't feel anger at first. That realization terrified him even more. Because anger meant he still had control. Anger meant he could hunt, could punish, could fix this with the same brutal efficiency he used to solve every other problem in his blood-soaked world. But standing there in that empty penthouse, surrounded by the ghost of a family he'd taken for granted, Jin Ho felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: helplessness. His phone buzzed. A text from his financial analyst. "Sir, we've detected unusual activity. Someone's been siphoning funds through encrypted channels for the past 8 months. Total missing, $47 million. Jin Ho's jaw clenched. You know that moment when you realize the person sleeping next to you for 15 years was a complete stranger? That the woman you thought was shopping for designer handbags was actually building an escape route right under your nose? That's what slammed into him. He pulled up the security footage again, watching Ruth move through their home with Jaden on her hip. How many times had he walked past her without really seeing her? How many times had she asked about his day, only to be met with silence or a dismissive wave? Behind him, his second-in-command cleared his throat nervously. "Boss, what do you want us to do?" Jin Ho didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the screen, on a moment from 3 weeks ago, Ruth standing at the living room window, a bullet hole in the glass behind her, Jaden clutching her leg in terror. Jin Ho's own voice echoed from the footage's audio, "Get used to it." That's when it hit him. The woman who disappeared wasn't just his wife. She was the only person who'd ever looked at him and seen something worth saving, and he'd thrown it away for what? Power? Respect? A throne built on corpses and cocaine? But here's what Jin Ho didn't know yet. The woman he was about to spend 3 years hunting down, she wasn't running scared. And before I tell you what happens when Korea's most dangerous man finally tracks down the family he destroyed, hit the subscribe button and comment where you are watching from. And trust me, the confrontation will shatter everything Jin Ho thought he knew about love, loyalty, and what it means to truly lose. Make sure you're following this story so you don't miss a single chapter of his descent from king to broken man. Because sometimes the cruelest revenge isn't violence, it's becoming someone's forgotten memory. The thing about blood is that it doesn't wash out easily. Jin Ho learned that at 16 when he killed his first man. Now, at 42, he'd stopped counting both the bodies and the stains. He stood at his bathroom sink, methodically scrubbing crimson from beneath his fingernails, while his phone buzzed with reports from tonight's negotiation. 3 broken ribs, 1 shattered kneecap, a very clear message sent to the Busan crew about territorial respect. Just another Tuesday. He checked his Patek Philippe, 2:47 a.m. Ruth would be asleep. She was always asleep when he came home. Or pretending to be, which amounted to the same thing. Jin Ho walked through the penthouse, his footsteps echoing on marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. 15,000 square feet of luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, modern art that he'd never looked at twice, a home that felt like a mausoleum. He found her in Jaden's room, curled up in the reading chair beside their son's bed. Her blonde hair caught the nightlight's glow, and for a moment, just a moment, Jinho remembered why he'd married her, before the empire consumed everything, before he'd turned into the monster his father always knew he'd become. Jinho. Her voice was quiet, careful, the way people spoke around explosives. Jaden had another nightmare about the men with guns. He glanced at his sleeping son, 6 years old and already afraid of shadows. "Kids have nightmares," Jinho said, loosening his tie. "He'll grow out of it." "He asked me why Daddy's friends carry guns to our house. He's 6. He shouldn't have to ask questions like that." "He's my son. This is his world. The sooner he understands that." The living room window exploded. Jinho moved on instinct, tackling Ruth to the floor as glass rained down around them. His hand went to the gun at his hip, eyes scanning for shooters. But there was no follow-up, no assault team, just silence and glittering shards scattered across expensive rugs. Jaden was screaming. Ruth scrambled toward their son, pulling him into her arms, while Jinho approached the window. A single bullet hole punched through the reinforced glass, high-caliber, precision shot, not meant to kill, meant to send a message. On the floor, wrapped around the bullet, was a red ribbon with a small card. Jinho picked it up, his jaw tightening as he read the 2 words scrawled in Korean, "Sleep well." The Gwangju family. They were getting bold. Ruth stood in the doorway, Jaden clutched to her chest, both of them shaking. Her blonde eyes met his, and Jinho saw something in them he'd never seen before. Not fear, calculation. "Get used to it," he said, pulling out his phone to call his security team. "This is who we are." He didn't see her expression shift, didn't see the moment his wife stopped being his wife and became something else entirely, something far more dangerous than any rival family could ever be, a woman with nothing left to lose. Ruth had been planning Jaden's 6th birthday party for 3 weeks. Superhero theme, his favorite. She'd ordered a custom Iron Man cake from the boutique bakery in Gangnam, hung red and gold streamers across the dining room, and wrapped presents she knew he'd love. A remote control car, building blocks, that stuffed tiger he'd been eyeing at the toy store. And she'd asked Jinho for exactly one thing: be home by 6 p.m. He'd kissed her forehead that morning, distracted, already halfway out the door. "I promise. Wouldn't miss it." That was 14 hours ago. Now Ruth sat alone at the dining table, watching wax drip down untouched birthday candles. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m. The ice cream cake had melted into a puddle of blue and red streaks, like a watercolor painting of disappointment. Jaden had cried himself to sleep around 9, asked her 6 times if Daddy was coming. She'd run out of lies by the 4th time. The penthouse door clicked open. Jinho walked in, still wearing his suit, though the tie was gone and his collar was unbuttoned. There was a particular heaviness to his movements, the kind that came after hours of work. She could see it in his knuckles, slightly swollen, in the way he avoided meeting her eyes. He stopped when he saw her sitting there in the dark. "Ruth, There was a traitor." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I know. There's always a traitor. Always someone who needs to be taught a lesson. Always something more important than your son." Jinho ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his features. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The Seoul families are consolidating. If I show any weakness..." "Jaden asked me if you forgot his birthday." That stopped him. I told him you were stuck in traffic, that you'd be here any minute. He believed me. You know why? Because he's 6, and 6-year-olds still believe their fathers love them. I do love him. I love both of you. This life, everything I've built, it's for you. No. Ruth finally looked at him, and Jinho felt something cold settle in his chest at her expression. This life is for you. Your empire, your reputation, your legacy. We're just decorations, pretty things you keep in a penthouse to remind yourself you're still human. She stood, smoothing down her dress, the one she'd worn to look nice for the party that never happened. I waited for you, Jinho. For years I waited. Waited for you to come home. Waited for you to remember you have a family. Waited for you to choose us just once. Ruth walked past him toward the hallway, and when she spoke again, her words were barely a whisper. But they hit him like a bullet. You're already dead to us, Jinho. You just don't know it yet. She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving him standing alone in a room full of superheroes and broken promises. Jinho didn't know it then, but he'd just lost everything. The countdown had already begun. Before Ruth Collins became a Mafia wife, she was something else entirely. Datacrypt Solutions, Senior Architect, Clearance Level, Omega. She'd built encryption systems for Fortune 500 companies, designed firewalls that could withstand state-sponsored cyber attacks, and created digital labyrinths so complex that even she sometimes got lost in them. Jinho had never asked what she did before they met, never cared enough to wonder why a woman with her credentials would fall for a gangster in a Seoul nightclub. That was his first mistake. The morning after Jaden's ruined birthday, Ruth dropped her son at his private academy with a kiss and a promise. Then she drove her Mercedes to the Gangnam shopping district, parked in the underground lot of the Galleria department store, and walked straight past the Chanel boutique. Security cameras tracked a black woman in Hermes sunglasses entering the luxury stores, still a rare enough sight in Seoul that people noticed, which was exactly what she wanted. They saw her shopping bags accumulate, saw her stop for coffee at the 5th-floor cafe. What they didn't see was Ruth slipping into the service elevator, descending to the maintenance level, and exiting through a delivery entrance 3 buildings away. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in a PC Bang, one of Seoul's countless internet cafes, wearing a black baseball cap pulled low and cheap clothes she'd stashed in a gym locker 6 months ago. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory kicking in after years of suburban domesticity. Jinho's empire ran on 3 things: fear, money, and information. Ruth was about to take away 2 of them. She'd been patient, observant. Every time Jinho brought his laptop home, she'd watched him type passwords over his shoulder while pretending to read. Every business dinner where his associates got drunk and careless with their phones, she'd been memorizing patterns. Every shopping trip for the past 8 months had been a reconnaissance mission. The Yoon family's financial network wasn't sophisticated. Gangsters rarely were. They relied on intimidation and corruption, not cybersecurity. Getting past their firewalls was like breaking into a house where someone had left all the windows open. Ruth created the backdoor first, a beautiful piece of code that would sit dormant in their servers, invisible to their mediocre IT team, waiting for her command. Then came the ghost accounts, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, routing numbers that led nowhere, digital breadcrumbs that would take investigators years to unravel. She allocated exactly $47 million, enough to disappear forever, not enough to cripple Jinho's operation and make him desperate enough to burn the world down looking for her. The transfers would trigger automatically over the next 6 weeks, small amounts, unnoticeable. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the accounts would be closed and the money would have been laundered through so many jurisdictions that even Interpol would give up. Next came the passports. Ruth Collins would die in a tragic car accident, fake police reports already drafted, a body that would never be found. In her place, Rebecca Thompson, Canadian citizen, elementary school teacher, widowed mother of one. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. Jaden's face flashed in her mind. Her sweet boy who still asked when Daddy would teach him to ride a bike, who still drew family pictures with 3 stick figures holding hands. Ruth's jaw tightened. She hit enter. The ghost protocol was active.
Jin-ho hated Tokyo. Too clean, too polite, too many rules for a man who'd built his empire by breaking them. But the Yamamoto family controlled half of Japan's underground ports, and if the Yoon Syndicate wanted to expand their reach into Southeast Asia, this merger was necessary. 3 days, that's all it would take. Sign the contracts, shake the hands, make the appropriate threats disguised as promises. He called home on the second night. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Jin-ho frowned, checking his watch. 8:47 p.m. Seoul time. Ruth always answered, even when she was angry. Even when she wasn't speaking to him, she always picked up to let him know Jaden was safe. He pulled up the security app on his phone. 12 cameras throughout the penthouse, all linked to his device. The master bedroom camera showed Ruth sleeping, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Jaden's room showed his son curled up with that stuffed tiger, nightlight glowing softly. Jin-ho exhaled. Probably just had her phone on silent. He tried again the next morning. No answer. And again that afternoon. Nothing. By evening, a cold knot had formed in his stomach. He opened the security feed again. Ruth in the kitchen making dinner, Jaden doing homework at the table, everything normal. Everything too normal. Jin-ho called his head of security. "Send someone to the house, now." "Sir, the cameras show—" "I don't care what the cameras show. Send someone now." 15 minutes later, his phone rang. "Boss?" The guard's voice was shaking. "The house is empty." Jin-ho's blood went cold. "What do you mean, empty?" "I mean, there's nobody here. The beds are made, but there's no clothes in the closets, no toothbrushes in the bathrooms, the kids' room. All his toys are gone. It's like they were never here." Jin-ho pulled up the security feed with trembling hands. There was Ruth, clear as day, reading on the couch. There was Jaden playing with blocks on the floor. "That's impossible. I'm looking at them right now." "Sir, I'm standing in your living room. There's nobody—" The guard's voice cut off. Then, "Boss, there's something taped to the TV." "What is it?" "A USB drive." Jin-ho was on a plane within the hour. He burst into his penthouse at 2 a.m., his security team scrambling behind him. The guard was right. The place was stripped. Not hastily, not frantically, methodically. Ruth had taken everything that mattered and left behind only the expensive furniture that didn't. Jin-ho plugged the USB drive into his laptop with shaking hands. A single video file. He clicked it. Ruth's face filled the screen. She was sitting in their living room, but not recently. This was from weeks ago, maybe months. She looked directly into the camera with an expression he'd never seen before. Calm. Controlled, victorious. "Hello, Jin-ho," she said softly. "If you're watching this, then you finally noticed we're gone. The security footage you've been watching is a 72-hour loop I created 3 months ago. By the time you see this, Jaden and I will be somewhere you'll never find us." She leaned forward, and Jin-ho saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. "You taught me that disappearing people is easy. You just never thought I'd be the one doing it." The screen went black. Jin-ho stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him like ash. She was gone. Jin-ho didn't sleep for 3 days. He shut down the port of Incheon, every shipping container, every cargo vessel, every private yacht, inspected, searched, torn apart. His men bribed customs officials at Gimpo and Incheon airports, pulling surveillance footage from every camera, checking every passenger manifest from the past week. Nothing. Ruth Collins and her son had vanished like smoke. On day 4, Jin-ho dragged his IT director into his office by the collar and threw him against the wall. "Find her." "Sir, we've checked everything. There's no record of them leaving the country. No plane tickets, no train reservations, no—" "Then check again." Jin-ho's voice was dangerously quiet. "Check hospitals, check morgues, check every hotel between here and Busan. She didn't just evaporate." But that's exactly what it looked like. By day 7, Jin-ho's lieutenants were whispering their boss had lost his mind. He'd abandoned critical operations to chase after a runaway wife. The other families were circling, sensing weakness. Jin-ho didn't care. He tortured Ruth's hairstylist, interrogated Jaden's taekwondo instructor, threatened the clerk at the private academy until the terrified woman wet herself. Nobody knew anything. Or, if they did, Ruth had paid them enough to stay silent. Then his accountant came to him, pale and sweating. "Sir, there's a problem with the offshore accounts." Jin-ho looked up from the map he'd been staring at for 6 hours. Red strings connecting locations, theories, dead ends. "What problem?" "Money's missing. A lot of it." The room tilted. Jin-ho pulled up the financial records, his eyes scanning numbers that had once made perfect sense. Now they looked like a foreign language. Transfers he didn't authorize, accounts he'd never opened, money flowing out in a dozen different directions, like blood from a severed artery. $47 million. Gone. His hands started shaking. Ruth had done this. His wife, his quiet, obedient American wife, who he thought spent her days shopping and drinking coffee with other expats, had systematically robbed him blind. How long has this been happening? 8 months, sir. Maybe longer. The transactions were small enough that they didn't trigger alerts. Whoever did this knew exactly how our system worked. Jin-ho laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound that made his accountant step back in fear. 8 months. She'd been planning this for 8 months. While he was building his empire, she was dismantling it. While he was breaking rivals, she was breaking him. Every shopping trip, every smile, every time she'd said, "I love you," and he'd barely looked up from his phone. She'd been playing him the entire time. Jin-ho pulled up the photo from Jaden's birthday, the one Ruth had left face down on the nightstand. His son's tear-streaked face, the melted cake, the empty chair where he should have been. "You're already dead to us, Jin-ho. You just don't know it yet." He finally understood what she meant. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about escape. This was about revenge. And Ruth Collins, the woman he married, the woman he ignored, the woman he underestimated, had just declared war on the most dangerous man in South Korea. She'd taken his family, his money, his peace of mind. But here's what terrified him most. He'd never actually known her at all. 3 years passed like a prison sentence. Jin-ho became untouchable. He absorbed the Gwangju family, crushed the Busan crew, and expanded into markets that made other syndicates look like street gangs. By every measure that mattered to men like him, he'd won. The penthouse in Seoul, the villa in Jeju, the nightclubs, the politicians, the judges, all of them in his pocket. He was the most powerful man in South Korea, and he was completely hollow. His associates noticed the changes. Jin-ho didn't drink anymore at celebrations, didn't take mistresses like the other bosses. Every negotiation ended the same way, swift, brutal, efficient. Then he'd return to that empty penthouse and sit in the dark. Jaden's bedroom remained exactly as it was. Superhero posters on the walls, building blocks scattered on the floor where his son had left them, the stuffed tiger sitting on the bed like it was waiting for someone to come home. Jin-ho's men knew better than to suggest he move on. Every woman he met was measured against Ruth. Their laugh, not quite right. Their intelligence, not sharp enough. The way they looked at him, with fear or greed or desire, but never with that particular mixture of love and disappointment that Ruth had perfected. He'd hired every investigator money could buy. Private detectives, ex-intelligence operatives, hackers who could crack government databases. They'd chased ghosts across 6 continents and found nothing. Ruth Collins had become a phantom. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, his lead cyber analyst burst into his office without knocking. "Sir, we found something." Jinho's heart stuttered. He hadn't felt hope in so long that he'd forgotten what it tasted like. "Show me." The analyst pulled up lines of code on the screen. "We've been monitoring dark web forums, tracking encryption patterns. Most hackers have signatures, specific ways they write code, like fingerprints. 3 days ago, someone used a particular encryption style on a small municipal server in Oregon." "Oregon?" Jinho leaned forward. "United States?" "Small town called Silver Falls, population 9,000. The encryption was used to access school records." The analyst pulled up another screen. "Sir, this style is almost identical to the backdoor code used to steal from our accounts 3 years ago. Same architecture, same—" "How certain are you?" "97%. Whoever this is, they trained at the same place Ruth Collins did. Or," the analyst swallowed hard, "they are Ruth Collins." Jinho was on his private jet within 4 hours. He'd spent 3 years trying to hate her, telling himself he was hunting a thief, not his wife, that this was about recovering stolen money, not recovering a family. But as the plane crossed the Pacific, Jinho stared at his reflection in the window and admitted the truth. He'd burned his empire to the ground looking for her, had turned himself into something even more monstrous than before, all because somewhere, buried beneath the scar tissue and violence, he still remembered what it felt like to be loved by Ruth Collins. And he'd do anything, anything to feel that way again, even if she'd spent 3 years making sure he never would. The plane touched down in Portland at dawn. The hunt was almost over. Silver Falls, Oregon looked like a postcard. Tree-lined streets, white picket fences, a main street with a bakery, a hardware store, and a coffee shop where everyone seemed to know each other's names. The kind of place where people still waved at strangers and left their doors unlocked. The exact opposite of Seoul's concrete jungle. Jinho sat in a blacked-out SUV parked across from the town's farmer's market, his pulse hammering in his ears. He'd tracked the digital signature to a small house on Maple Street. Simple surveillance confirmed what his gut already knew. She was here. And then he saw her. Ruth walked through the market wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her natural hair in loose curls that caught the autumn sunlight. No designer labels, no Hermes sunglasses, no carefully constructed armor of luxury. She was laughing. Actually laughing, head thrown back, eyes bright, at something the woman selling organic vegetables had said. She looked younger, lighter, like someone had lifted a crushing weight off her shoulders. Jinho's chest constricted. 3 years. 3 years of searching, of obsessing, of believing that when he found her, she'd be miserable, that she'd need him, that she'd realize running was a mistake. But Ruth looked free. Then he saw movement near the playground adjacent to the market. A dark boy in a soccer uniform, dribbling a ball with surprising skill for his age. Darker skin, hair cut short, wearing a Silver Falls Youth League jersey with the number 7. Jaden, 9 years old now, taller, his features sharpening, looking more like Jinho every day. The resemblance was undeniable, those same intense eyes, that same focused expression when he concentrated. Jinho's hand reached for the door handle. Every instinct screamed at him to run to his son, to grab him, to never let go. But then Jaden kicked the ball too hard, and it rolled toward the parking lot. A man jogged after it,
white, mid-30s, wearing khakis and a Silver Falls Clinic polo shirt. He scooped up the ball and ruffled Jaden's hair, saying something that made the boy grin. Jin-ho watched, paralyzed, as Jaden called out, "Thanks, Dr. Mike." The man, Dr. Mike, tossed the ball back and jogged toward Ruth, who turned when she saw him approach, and her face transformed into something Jin-ho hadn't seen in years. Genuine happiness. Dr. Mike said something. Ruth laughed again. He touched her lower back, casual, comfortable, the kind of touch that spoke of familiarity, and they walked together toward where Jaden was playing. The three of them looked like a portrait, a family. Jin-ho felt something crack inside his chest. Not anger, not jealousy, something worse. Recognition. This is what it looked like when Ruth was loved properly, when someone showed up, when someone chose her. This is what Jaden's childhood could have been if his father hadn't been a monster, more interested in building an empire than building a life. Jin-ho sat in that SUV for 2 hours, watching watching her family exist in a world where he was nothing but a forgotten nightmare. And for the first time in 3 years, Jin-ho understood that finding them wasn't the victory. It was the punishment. Jin-ho waited until Dr. Mike left for his evening shift at the clinic. He'd learned the man's schedule over 3 days of surveillance. Pediatrician, widower, moved to Silver Falls 2 years ago, coached Jaden's soccer team. The kind of man who probably rescued kittens and helped old ladies cross the street. Everything Jin-ho wasn't. The house on Maple Street was modest. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, flower boxes in the windows. Jin-ho's penthouse bathroom was bigger than Ruth's entire living room, yet somehow this felt more like a home than any place he'd ever owned. He picked the lock in under 30 seconds. Ruth was in the kitchen, her back to him, humming while she washed dishes. The radio played soft jazz. Through the window, he could see Jaden in the backyard, kicking his soccer ball against a practice net. "Hello, Ruth." She went completely still. Didn't scream, didn't drop the plate she was holding, just slowly turned around, water dripping from her hands. Her expression wasn't fear, it was resignation. "I was wondering when you'd find us," she said quietly. "Took you longer than I expected." Jin-ho stepped closer, and that's when he felt it, a subtle vibration against his chest. He looked down. A small device had been attached to his shirt when he'd brushed past the coat rack. Ruth held up her phone. On the screen, his heart rate, 127 BPM and climbing. "Biometric sensor," she explained calmly. "If your heart rate exceeds 140, the threshold for extreme stress or violence, an automated system sends a complete digital archive to the Seoul District Prosecutor's office. Every transaction, every murder, every bribe. 15 years of evidence, all packaged with a nice bow." Jin-ho's jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Ruth's eyes were ice cold. "Go ahead, Jin-ho. Get angry. Grab me. Do whatever it is you came here to do. But the moment your pulse spikes, you'll spend the rest of your life in a Korean prison. And we both know what happens to fallen crime bosses in there." His hands trembled at his sides. 3 years. 3 years of searching, and now that he'd found her, she'd turned him into a caged animal. "I just want to see my son." "Your son?" Ruth's laugh was sharp. "You haven't been his father in 4 years. You were a ghost who occasionally slept in our house and terrified him with bullets and blood." "I can change. You can leave." Ruth set down her phone but kept her finger hovering over the screen. "You can get in your car, fly back to Seoul, and pretend you never found us. That's the only option that doesn't end with you in handcuffs." "Ruth, please." The back door opened. Jaden walked in, soccer ball under his arm, grass stains on his knees. He froze when he saw Jin-ho standing in the kitchen. Jin-ho's heart rate spiked.
135 BPM. His phone vibrated with a warning. "Jaden," he whispered, dropping to his knees. Tears he didn't know he could still cry burned his eyes. "Jaden, it's me. It's Daddy." His son stared at him with confusion and something worse. Nothing. No recognition, no joy, no fear. Just the polite wariness of a child looking at a stranger.
Jaden took a step back, instinctively moving toward his mother. "Mommy?" His voice was small, uncertain. "Who is this man?" Those 5 words destroyed Jin-ho more completely than any bullet ever could. Ruth placed a protective hand on Jaden's shoulder, her eyes never leaving Jin-ho's face. The biometric sensor blinked on her phone. 138 BPM. One spike away from ending everything. "He's..." Ruth hesitated, and Jin-ho saw the calculation behind her eyes. She could tell Jaden the truth, could explain that this broken man kneeling on their kitchen floor was his father. "He's someone who used to know us, a long time ago." Used to know us. Past tense. Erased. As if their entire life together had been nothing but a brief, forgettable chapter. Jin-ho looked at his son, really looked at him. Jaden had Ruth's smile now, her warmth. The fear that used to live in his eyes was gone, replaced by the confident brightness of a child who felt safe, who slept through the night without nightmares about men with guns. "Why is he crying?" Jaden whispered to Ruth, pressing closer to her side. "Sometimes adults cry when they're sad," Ruth said softly, her hand stroking Jaden's hair with a tenderness that used to be reserved for Jin-ho too. "Is he going to hurt us?" That question shattered something fundamental in Jin-ho's chest. His son thought he was a threat, a dangerous stranger. And the worst part? Jaden was right. Everything Jin-ho touched turned to violence and ash. He'd built an empire on broken bones and terror, convinced himself it was all for his family. But standing here in this small kitchen that smelled like cookies and safety, he finally understood. He wasn't protecting them. He was the thing they needed protection from. Jin-ho stood slowly, every movement deliberate so he wouldn't spike his heart rate further. His phone showed 136 BPM. Still dangerous, still one emotional surge away from prison. "No," he said hoarsely, speaking directly to Jaden. "I'm not going to hurt anyone. I promise." Jaden studied him with those dark eyes, Jin-ho's eyes, and seemed to find whatever answer he was looking for. "Okay. Do you want a cookie? Mommy made snickerdoodles." The casual innocence of it broke Jin-ho completely. His son was offering cookies to the monster who'd abandoned him. "No, thank you," he managed. He looked at Ruth one final time, memorized the way she stood there, strong, unafraid, everything he'd taken for granted. Ruth's expression didn't soften. "Sorry doesn't change the past, Jin-ho. It just means you finally understand what you destroyed." He nodded, throat too tight for words. Jin-ho walked to the door, each step feeling like a betrayal of every instinct screaming at him to stay, to fight, to reclaim what was his. But nothing was his. Not anymore. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. Jaden had already forgotten him, showing Ruth a drawing from school. Mother and son, absorbed in their own world. A world that had no room for Yoon Jin-ho. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Pack everything. We're leaving Silver Falls." "Sir, what about them? They don't exist. Do you understand me? Ruth Collins and her son are ghosts. Nobody touches them, nobody looks for them, nobody even speaks their names." Jin-ho climbed into his SUV and watched the house through the rearview mirror. Lights glowed warm in the windows. He could see Ruth moving through the kitchen, Jaden laughing at something. They looked happy. They looked free. The SUV pulled away, and Jin-ho didn't look back again. He returned to Seoul a king with no kingdom that mattered. He had power, wealth, fear, respect,
everything except the two people who'd ever made him feel human. Jin-ho had won every war, except the battle for his son's heart, and that was the only battle that ever mattered. Sometimes the people who ignore you until you disappear don't realize they're creating something unstoppable. They think you're weak because you're quiet, that you're trapped because you stayed. But really, they're just teaching you patience, strategy, exactly how much you can endure before you stop enduring and start executing. Jin-ho thought he was building an empire, but while he was stacking bodies and counting money, Ruth was building an escape route so perfect he never saw it coming. She walked into his world as a woman in love. She walked out as a ghost he'd spend 3 years chasing and a lifetime regretting. Was it justice? Was it revenge? Maybe it was both. Maybe that's what freedom looks like when you've been invisible for so long that disappearing becomes your greatest weapon. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. Did Ruth do the right thing? Should she have tried harder to save the marriage, given Jin-ho one more chance? Or was she justified in erasing herself and their son from his life? And what about Jaden? Did he deserve to grow up not knowing his real father, even if that father was a monster? Some of you are probably thinking Ruth's a hero. Others might see her as cold, calculating, maybe even cruel for keeping a son from his father. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know if you're Team Ruth or if you think she went too far. And Jin-ho? Was he beyond redemption? Could a man drowning in blood and violence ever really change? Or was Ruth smart to cut her losses before he dragged them both under? The truth is, we all reach breaking points. We all have moments where we decide, stay and die slowly, or leave and rebuild from nothing. And sometimes the person you become on the other side of that choice is someone even you don't recognize anymore. Stronger, colder, capable of things you never thought possible. Ruth is still out there, living a life Jin-ho will never touch. And Jin-ho? He's still sitting in that empty penthouse, surrounded by everything he fought for and nothing that matters. That counts for something. If this story grabbed you and didn't let go, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories where this came from. Stories about people who refuse to be erased, who choose themselves when everyone else chose power, who learn that sometimes the cruelest revenge isn't violence, it's becoming someone's forgotten memory. I'm here every week with stories that dig deep, hit hard, and don't apologize for the uncomfortable truths they expose. Stories about survival, transformation, and the complicated spaces between love and war. Because the best stories aren't about perfect heroes, they're about imperfect people making impossible choices, and sometimes those choices cost everything. So tell me, was Ruth a survivor or a villain? Did Jin-ho deserve a second chance? And would you have done the same thing in her position? Until next time, stay dangerous. Silent Speaks Story, where every story leaves a mark.